You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio. Welcome to the Bitter Medicine Podcast, where it's all about Black empowerment. Our show focuses on Black news and entertainment, arts, science, economics, history, people, and strategies that uplift, empower, and motivate Africans within the diaspora. And now, your host, whose favorite color is black, Goku.
Welcome back to the Bitter Medicine Podcast. I am your host, Koku. I want to thank you guys for tuning in once again. This is a Thanksgiving Day broadcast, live stream. And so I know a lot of y'all probably sleeping or watching football or drunk out your skull or something like that. It's all good. Just wanted to tackle this paper. This paper has been, I've had this for a little while now, and I actually had another paper that this paper references that I thought about presenting as well. But I decided to present this one. I think it's good to discuss economics because I think we need to understand that we had our own economy before we came into contact with these white folks. And so, you know, in that spirit of Sankofa, of going back and bringing forward, you know, we need to, you know, understand what it was that we did before. I see the pro-Black perspective is here, saying, get the likes up. I appreciate that, bro. I want to remind you guys before we start the reading that this show is part of a podcast network called KWAZ Radio. There are other shows on the network you are invited to tune into.
This is D Webb with the Harsh Reality Podcast, asking you to tune in where we tackle the news of the day that affects our community, only on KWAZ Radio.
Peace, family. This is Oni, inviting you to listen to the pro-Black perspective, where Black problems are addressed with Black solutions.
Greetings, fam. Tune in to The Learning Curve with me, the Revolutionary Matron on KWAZ Radio.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
Yes, indeed. Make sure to check out all of those shows on the network. You know what? Let me do this too. Let me join into the voice chat on the Discord. So the Discord is open. If anyone chooses to hop on the live show, I don't know why it's taking so long to open that room, but the Discord should be open now. So if you want to hop on there, you can. Greetings to the Learning Curve. That's the Revolutionary Matron. Thank you for tuning in. I appreciate you. Get to the paper. Discord is acting up. So, traditional production in primitive African economies. So this is a pretty old paper, as you would imagine. Right? Economic historians often stress the role played by the traditional institutions of pre-industrial European countries in shaping their sequential patterns of development. That the cost, speed, and specific lines of development were influenced by what existed before industrialization. However, we seem not to apply the lesson to exotic areas such as Africa. Economists rarely show interest in the voluminous anthropological literature concerned with the economic organization of primitive societies before Western impact. Yet it is these same primitive societies in Africa, Asia, and Latin America which are now so much the concern of the economics of development. Although Western impact in the form of wage employment and dependence upon cash cropping have become widespread in Africa, it is probably still true as it was in the early 1950s, that most Africans get the bulk of their livelihood from traditional modes of production within the framework of tribal societies. It is with such relatively unchanged primitive economies in Africa that this paper is concerned. There are at least two kinds of development problems for the solution of which knowledge of primitive economic structure is useful. One, what accounts for the marked difference in receptivity? Two, economic and technological change among primitive societies. Why do some adopt Western institutions and techniques with ease and alacrity, while others resist the changes necessary to generate growth? Two, why is economic development often accompanied by traumatic social change? Is it possible to reduce the social costs and dislocations by building compensators into the new economic forms? That's an interesting question. The point of this paper is to show how primitive economies in Africa differ structurally from developed economies in the West. Our concern is not so much with technological differences as with differences in the organization of production. And for either the West or primitive Africa, it is convenient to regard production of any kind as consisting of three component sub-processes: the allocation of labor and other factors, work process of arranging and transforming resources into products, the disposition of what is produced. Brings us to a section called the absence of market dependence. At the outset, we may summarize our main theme as follows: absence of market exchange as the dominant economic organization allows indigenous African production to take forms different from those in Western economy. These forms invariably entail social control of production by kinship, religion, and political organization. Therefore, and I thought this was interesting, therefore, change in primitive economic processes means inevitable change in social organization. Primitive communities, the individual is an economic fact, the individual as an economic factor, personalized, not anonymous. He tends to hold his economic position in virtue of his social position. Hence, to displace him economically means a social disturbance. It is necessary to emphasize the economic importance of indigenous social organization because production in tribal Africa is most frequently a community activity, in MacIver's sense, and only rarely associational. Association is a group specifically organized for the purpose of an interest, a group of interests which its members have in common. Community is a circle of people who live together, who belong together, so that they share not this or that particular interest, but a whole set of interests, wide enough, comprehensive enough to include their lives. We are used to thinking in terms of production units, because the Western firm is an association, not importantly affected by kinship, religious, or political affiliation of participants. In Africa, however, production is often undertaken by intimate communities of persons sharing a multitude of social ties and functions, one of which happens to be the production of material goods. If we are not to prejudge the nature of production organization in African economy, it must be understood that none of those special characteristics of Western production due to the use of machines and reliance upon factor and output markets need be found. The component processes exist: the allocation of factors, the arrangement of work, and the disposition of produce. How they are organized in the absence of market integration must be a matter for investigation. In a word, every society has production processes, but not necessarily production units. Indigenously, the most important production lines in Africa are agricultural, carried on without machine technology, and for subsistence purposes rather than primarily for market sale. Unlike his counterpart in the American Midwest, the African farmer typically is not enmeshed in that kind of larger economy from which he extracts his livelihood as a specialist producer of cash crops, the money proceeds of which are used to recoup his cost of production, and the residual, which is his income proper, used to buy daily used material items and services. You know, it's funny, like in this paper is where I, you know, because you're born in the West, right? And this is why it's so important to really understand and choose where you're from, so to speak. Because being from the West, I never thought about the fact that our ancestors on the continent didn't just specialize in like, okay, I'm a farmer and I farm, you know, peanuts or something like that, right? These guys did a bunch of things, right? These guys didn't just focus on a crop, for example, right? And I thought that was interesting. It felt weird to not have ever even thought outside of the box that we, you know, are in the West. The absence of machines and of market dependence are related. As with hired labor or any other purchase factor, a machine represents a money cost, which can be incurred only if the purchaser uses the machine to enlarge his money sales revenue from which he recovers its costs. The analytical point to be stressed is that without purchase ingredients of production, and without reliance upon market disposition of output, input and output decisions of producers cannot be based on factor and output prices as guiding parameters. Yeah, okay. That neither factor nor product prices exist to constrain the indigenous African agriculturists as they do the Western is crucial to understanding why it is that Africans can organize production in such seemingly bizarre, quote-unquote, social ways. All right, so the paper that I have before this paper, that this paper actually referenced earlier, is a paper about, what do you call it? It's a paper that's about the impact of money on African subsistence economy. And I might still read that in the future too. Why did I bring that up? That paper talks about this. That paper stresses how money impacted the social stratification or social order in Africa. Just by bringing in the concept of money, it really changed the culture on the continent, which I thought was, you know, pretty. You expect it, but not on the level that it happened. Not in quite the way it happened on the continent. So that paper, I'm actually gonna bring that out maybe next week and read that paper. A related point of contrast is that unlike the Western worker, the African is rarely a full-time specialist in one occupation or in one production group. Not only is it typical for him to produce for himself a wide range of the items he uses, his own house and tools, as well as his food, but during the course of a year, he's frequently a part-time participant in several production activities. He may join sporadic work parties to do specific tasks, such as clearing fields for friends, kin, and chief. He may be of an age set which is obliged to perform community services, such as repairing roads. He may go on seasonal expeditions to extract ore for metals. And it was this here that, again, you really can't look at Africa through any kind of Western lenses because you'll get it all wrong. You know, when I happen to think about stuff like this, I thought about it from a Western view, you know, but it makes sense. And it's something I think we need to look back at. One of the reasons the reason I'm reading this paper is so that we can start thinking about economics a little bit more and how it ties in so perfectly with culture. how economics can change cultures and cultures can change economics. And so, this is why I brought this paper out tonight, so that we could really start talking about economics a little bit more. There's more I need to understand about economics. So I hope that in bringing a paper out like this, folks will engage me and we can engage each other talking about this stuff a little bit more. I just want to thank everyone who's here tonight. I want to thank you guys who listen to the playbacks. I get a lot of comments from folks who have listened to the playback. I appreciate that from all of you. Where was I? It is frequently the case that during the year, an African will work in several production groups, no one of which is crucial to his own livelihood. It is also common for an African to receive substantial amounts of factors, goods and services as gifts or in forms other than payment for work performed. So, did I skip something there? I don't think so. But again, I think this is interesting to understand. And I think this is in line with all the stuff we've read before about us being a Ubuntu society, a communal society, communitarianism, right? This makes a lot of sense. So basically, if I'm understanding it correctly with you, there's a bunch of people talking outside my window here. I was thinking hold on a second. The learning curve says, my family always farmed diverse crops. They switched out types of crops based on season and land use. Yeah, that's the way my grandmother them did it back home too. The learning curve says, also we need to rethink the jack of all trades allegory. That's true too. But I think what the paper shows here is that the communitarianism was pretty strong in the continent before, these folks came. And that it wasn't just community. You did your own thing too. And then you had time. You shared your time with others in the community to help them out as well. And I think that's something, this is what I was trying to say before the noise happened. I think that's something that we should aspire to do again. I've talked about it before in some simple ways, but Erzuliism is usually around when I do these live streams. Erzuliism is a filmmaker. Kevin Carre is a photographer. Let's get out there. Let's help do the tiny jobs that go on to make a production happen. Let's hold up lights. Let's build sets. Let's do whatever. And then when it's the next person's project, we go and we all jump in and help with that as well, while we still do the things we need to do for ourselves and our families and whatnot. I just think that's something that we should look back at and try to update. So this brings us to a section called Production and Social Organization. The negative point stressed above, that the absence of machines and market dependence means the absence of those kinds of constraints on production organization in the West, clears the way to examine two positive points stressed repeatedly in the literature of primitive Africa. One, that neighboring societies sharing the same physical environment often produce markedly different ranges of output, with different technologies used within differently organized production groups. Two, that such economic and technological differences are largely attributable to differences in social organization, that kinship, political and religious institutions constrain and direct all phases of production in the same sense that market structure and machine technology constrain and direct production in Western economy. Let me read that again, because let me make sure I get this. So 2, it says that such economic and technological differences are largely attributed to differences in social organization. Okay. That kinship, political, and religious institutions constrain and direct all phases of production. I get it. In the same sense that market structure and machine technology constrain and direct production in Western economy. The connections between indigenous African production and social organization may be described in 3 ways. 1, in terms of the McIver-Nadal distinction, production groups typically are not separate associations, but rather are integral parts of a community. Right? So, would production groups, for those of you guys listening with me live, are production groups, as if to say, divisions of labor? You guys let me know what you think about that. The ties between producers tend to reach out beyond the common interest in the act of production and its rewards alone. A production relationship is often only one facet of a social relationship. Economic relationships can be understood only as part of a scheme of social relations. Economic anthropology deals primarily with the economic aspects of the social relations of persons. Special organizations to carry out cultivation or manufacture need not be expected among the Bantu. Oh, among the Bantu. The functions are always actively carried out, but often by organizations of which the family or household is the most important, which exist to carry out almost all necessary functions, including the religious, the legal, the political, and the educational, and which conduct manufacture and agriculture alongside of these other activities. So 2, the same point is generalized by Carl Polanyi, that's the other paper I was talking about, in saying that primitive economy is embedded in society. Primitive economy is embedded in society in the sense that the economic system functions as a byproduct of a non-economic institution. That economy, as a cohesive entity, separate set of practices and relationships apart from social organization, does not exist in primitive life. Let me read that on one more time, just to make sure I get the point. The same point is generalized by Carl Polanyi in saying that primitive economy is quote-unquote embedded in society, in the sense that the economic system functions as a byproduct of non-economic institutions. That economy as a cohesive entity, a separate set of practices and relationships apart from social organization, does not exist in primitive life. 3, if the organization of production in African economies is indeed an inextricable part of social community, it should be possible to show how each component, sub-process of production, the allocation of factor resources, the arrangement of work, and the disposition of produce is related to social structure. So that's interesting. I think we all have had a little bit of that understanding, but let's see how well they flesh out that thought. Allocation of factors of production. Production in all economies requires organizational devices and rules to direct labor, land, and other resources to specific uses. Resource allocation is never unstructured because continuity in the production of basic goods is never unimportant. One may gain insight into the special rules which mark off types of economy, say the United States compared with the Soviet Union, compared with the Bantu of South Africa, by asking which transactional procedures channel resources to production lines, how are land, labor, and other resources allocated? How do they change hands or usage? So I can't remember if it's this paper or the paper that I said it links to. Can't remember which one it was, but one of them gives a good outline for us, right? When we talk about piecing together the histories that we don't know. I think one of these, could be the other one, gives a good outline of exactly how Africans, for example, had writs, like legal writs and deeds about land usage, about what's the term again? About how you could pass land down to your benefactors, inheritance, etc. So let's look out for that. Dorico Cooper Photography says, saying peace, family. The Learning Curve said worker co-ops. The Pro-Black Perspective says, I think production group is like a group of weavers or artisans or blacksmiths. Okay. So, well, yeah. Okay. So it's not a division of labor along the sexes or whatever, male work, female work, but yeah, different groups of people in, say, like a class. Okay, yeah, that's what I thought. Okay, let's continue. In our economy, factors as well as products are marketable commodities. In tribal Africa, products are frequently marketed, but factors almost never. A distinguishing characteristic of such economies is that labor and natural resources have no separate economic organization. Factor movements and appropriations are expressions of social obligation, social affiliation, and social right. Second characteristic is that typically land utilization is organized differently from labor utilization. Unlike Western market economy, each of the factor ingredients may enter production lines through different institutional channels, the channels being structured social relationships. Both points are illustrated by the following examples. In much of agricultural Africa, land for homesteads and farms is acquired through tribal affiliation or kinship right. One receives land as a matter of status prerogative. Only rarely is land acquired or disposed of through purchase and sale. Okay, so I think it was this paper, right? So that's an interesting thing, right? You didn't really purchase and buy. So I've long heard people say, in Africa we didn't talk about land ownership and stuff like that. That's not really true. I guess what we really didn't do was sell and purchase land. It was something that it was as they put it, a social thing. Right? So the Bantu are typical in this regard. Every household head, let me stop that phone from ringing. Every household head has an exclusive right to land for building his home and for cultivation. Generally, he can take up such land for himself within the area controlled by his sub-chief or headman, provided that he does not encroach upon land already occupied or cultivated by others. Failing this, it is the duty of his headman to provide him gratuitously with as much land as he needs. He also has the right, subject to the approval of his headman, to give away part of it to a relative or friend, or to lend it to someone else, but he may never sell or dispose of it in any other way in return for material considerations. Should he finally abandon the spot, his land reverts to the tribe as a whole and can subsequently be assigned to someone else. The only other way in which he can lose his right to the land is by confiscation if he is found guilty of some serious crime. That's an interesting, way of doing things. So too with the TIV, and the paper that I was talking about focuses on the TIV and TIV land. So too with the TIV, the Dahomians, the Nupe, and the Kikuyu. What makes the African social integument so important for factor allocation and therefore production is that land may be acquired through one set of social relationships, while labor to work the land is acquired through others. In the same Bantu societies in which land is acquired from chiefs by all family heads as a matter of tribal affiliation, labor to work the land is acquired by marriage rights. Wives do to sustain cultivation, and by kinship and friendship reciprocity, work parties to do specific tasks such as clearing fields and harvesting. Put another way, the quote-unquote labor to perform different tasks in growing the same crop, clearing the field, planting, harvesting, may be acquired through different social relationships. So again, this is more of the same of what, we've talked about in the past before, of bartering your work, banding to, kind of the ASU or SUSU or ESU type thing where everyone comes around, pitches in, and help you to build and grow and, move on to the next person. And by the way, you know who does that right here in the States heavily? Is these Asians. These Chinese restaurant guys. That's how they do it. They go all in and get one store, work that store. As you guys know how they work a store. And the next thing, they come out with lucky number 2. Then lucky number 3 and up to lucky number 7 and all that kind of stuff. You see what I'm saying? That's what they do. They do the collective work, but they do their individual work too. That's what we need to do. In the chat, the learning curve says, what is it called when a group of people come together with diverse skills to create and sell the best product? That's a good question. What is it called when a group of people come together with diverse skills to create and sell the best product? The learning curve also says, I have suggested these types of land agreements without ever realizing this is an ancient way of being. That's what I'm saying. Like, some people tap in better and they kind of know. They kind of know what it was. These type of land agreements too, by the way, were happening in the Caribbean. The extent to which various community relationships allocate factors to production lines is even greater than indicated above. Each separate production line, farming, cattle raising, house construction, road construction, may use somewhat different institutionalized procedures for recruiting the labor and acquiring the land and material resources used in each. That is to say, labor for agriculture may be acquired in several ways, each different from labor used in producing other goods. As will be pointed out below, such factor diversity born of multiple social obligations is also the case with the disposition of the goods produced. African economies are multicentric in the allocation of both factors and produce. This multicentricity is expressed in 2 ways, both extremely common in primitive economy. 1, resources and products are arranged in groups, the items in one group exchangeable with each other, but not with items in other groups. Indeed, there may be items which are not exchangeable at all. Typically, quote-unquote subsistence items form one or more exchangeable groups, and quote-unquote prestige items, others. 2, each commensurable group of factors and products may be transacted by an essentially different socio-economic device or procedure, reciprocity or redistribution. Each socio-economic procedure expressing the special social obligation which induces the material transaction, and where relevant, dictating the permissible ratios at which commensurable goods may change hands. Let me read that again, make sure I understand it. Each commensurable group of factors and products may be transacted by an essentially different socio-economic device or procedure, be it reciprocity or redistribution. Each socio-economic procedure expressing the special social obligation which induces the material transaction, okay, I got that, and where relevant, dictating the permissible ratios at which commensurable goods may change hands. Okay. Market exchange is also a common transactional procedure in tribal Africa, but differs sharply from reciprocity and redistribution in the permissible range of goods transacted in markets, the forces which determine exchange ratios, and in the absence of a social imperative connected with market transactions. In summary, an African's role in each production process is usually defined by some aspect of his social status: tribal member, husband, cousin, friend, elder. The question what forces, institutions, or rules direct labor, land, and other resources to specific lines of production can be answered only with reference to community social organization. Is this making sense to you guys? Is this making sense? And what ideas are coming to mind? Right? The pro-black perspective says that's cooperative or business, I think, at the learning curve. Mr. Untouchable is here. Y'all say what's up to Mr. Untouchable. All right. Again, thank all you guys for coming through tonight. So this brings us to a section called work arrangement. The specific arrangement of work in any production line is the combined result of physical environment, technology, economic structure, and social organization. Let me read that one more time. The specific arrangement of work in any production line is the combined result of physical environment, technology, economic structure, and social organization. But the relative importance of each may differ between different production lines and between different types of economy. Here we will be concerned with one primary point of difference between Western and primitive economies. In our own system, the constraints imposed by economy-wide market integration and by machine technology are far more important in determining work organization than those imposed by physical environment and social structure. Tribal Africa, just the opposite is the case. Physical environment and social structure are all important because of the absence of machine technology, yes, and of a larger market economy to enforce economizing decisions on local procedures. Right? That physical environment imposes sharp constraints on African work organization is due to the great reliance by the Africans on production lines entailing little fabrication, such as agriculture and herding. Compared with their Western counterparts, the African agriculturalists and herder lack those devices of applied science, irrigation equipment, disease-resistant seeds, scientific stock breeding, etc., which reduce ecological risk in the West. Indeed, technology and science have allowed some Western farmers to organize farm work on something like a factory basis. However, the economic, as distinct from the technological differences between Western and primitive production, deserve emphasis. All right, so I get what they're saying. Similar types of constraints. Similar overall, but different when you look at them, closely, right? Dependence on market sale for income, together with reliance on purchased factors, force Western farmers into the same economizing choices of weighing cost against sales revenues that typify manufacturing processes. With us, farm production, too, is sensitive to market prices, which of necessity serve as guiding parameters for production decisions, including efficient work organization as measured by least costs. Where African producers do not use purchase factors and do not depend on market sale, economizing least cost choices in work arrangement are not enforced by technological or economic necessity as in the West. So here's a question. I guess it's hard to ask that question, the question I wanted to ask, because the environment is so different. But I guess I'll ask it anyway. Which one is better for the average African? Which version of this economy is better for the average African today? Right? Which version is better for the average African today? The learning curve says we have to figure out how to share the profit received and what we value when it comes to skill sets the individual has to offer. KW Don 7 is here saying Sawabona. Peace to KW Don 7. I appreciate you being here once again. But which one of these is better? I guess ultimately it's better for the African today. Right? When African producers, sorry, I think I read this already, but I'll read it again. When African producers do not use purchase factors and do not depend on market sale, economizing least cost choices in work arrangement are not enforced by technological or economic necessity as in the West. We are told frequently that in primitive economy, social relationships and values are important determinants of work organization, that sexual division of labor is maintained, that magic and religion impinge on work schedules, that there is often a festive aspect to work parties, and that it is not uncommon for more labor to be lavished on a task that is strictly necessary. It is because of the absence of Western market and technological constraints that work can be arranged to express social relationships. The tribal producer does not have a payroll to meet. Funny. It is not that he is indifferent to material abundance or efficiency. Rather, unlike the West, the larger economy neither compels producers to seek cost minimization, nor provides them with economic directives, factor and output prices, for example, to make economizing decisions in work arrangement. It is important to understand. So, I mean, to me, that kind of answers the previous question I had, right? It is important to understand this point in order to understand why economic development or Western quote-unquote impact induces such deep and wide social dislocation. When Western market economy comes to dominate some area of Africa, typically through a land shortage, forcing changeover to production of cash crops, there are socio-economic repercussions because of the need to reorganize factor allocation, work arrangement, and the range of items to be produced in accordance with market criteria. So just them coming to your nation. This is how important it is to really keep people out of your space. Just them coming into your nation, right, forces you, right, to change the way you've been organized, right? It forces you to change the way things were organized before. If you were farming just to be able to get the staple products on the tables for everyone to eat every day, once they come along, you probably have to dump that idea and now farm a cash crop that they probably introduced, or they probably determined what is the cash crop. And now that's all you're farming, in hopes that you could make a little bit of money to then buy the staple products that you would have had on, at the dinner table to feed your family every day. Mr. Untouchable says, depends on what you're trying to create in your nation. What kind of economy are you trying to create based on your own labor, technology, science, and land? Okay. What outcome do you intend to have? But that's heavy. The pro-black perspective I just saw, he said economics is the basis of culture, right? And that's that's true. And he tried to get that point across on his show a few episodes back, But I mean, there it is. There it is. So, I mean, we could even think about this on a little different level here too. Like, why are our relationships between our men and our women all fucked up? Because once these guys came in, infused their economics, fucked up your culture, now your whole social organization, the way you used to get along with your man and your woman is different. With your children, it's different. To continue, we had this section called Disposition of Products. The apportionment of outputs is a concept familiar to Westerners. We are used to tracing through the yearly flow of goods to their final recipients, as is done in national income accounting and input-output analysis. But as one economist who tried to measure product and income flows in primitive African economy points out, our Western categories of analysis are derived from our own very special market-integrated structure. An attempt to examine the structure and problems of a primitive community in the light of the existing body of economic thought raises fundamental conceptual issues. Economic analysis and its framework of generalizations are characteristically described in terms appropriate to the modern exchange economy. It is by no means certain that the existing tools of analysis can usefully be applied to material other than that for which they have been developed. In particular, it is not clear what light, if any, is thrown on subsistence economies by a science which seems to regard the use of money and specialization of labor as axiomatic. The jargon of the marketplace seems remote in the face of it from the problems of an African village where most individuals spend the greater part of their lives in satisfying their own or their family's needs and desires, where money and trade play a subordinate role in motivating productive activity. The absence of purchase factors, including machinery, and the lack of dependence on market sale for livelihood, together with the pervasive influence of the social integument, are reflected in the disposition of produce as well as in the allocation of factors and the organization of work. The income creating process is itself part and parcel of the income it yields, and the result of the process cannot be abstracted from the process itself. If the categories we use to describe output disposition are to be analytically revealing, they must be derived from the special structural characteristics of indigenous African economies. We follow, therefore, the African emphasis on the social obligations to pay and to give, and the rights to receive goods and services built into social situations. In the succinct statement of firth, quote, from each according to his status, obligations in the social system, to each according to his rights in that system. In primitive economy, transactions of products are like those of factors in four ways. One, factors and products both may be transacted by different rules or mechanisms within the same economy. Two, both may enter different transactional spheres in the sense that the items in each sphere are commensurable and exchangeable only with other items in the same sphere and not with items in different spheres. Three, the dispositions of factors and products cannot be understood outside the social situations which provide the impetus for their movement. For example, transactions of both express underlying social relationships. Four, what might be called socially guaranteed subsistence is arranged both through factor resource and product disposition. Illustration of each point is given below. Let me just check something quick here. Okay, good. So just a reminder, the Discord is open. Just had to check it just now. So reciprocity. Factors and products are transacted by any of three socio-economic rules or principles: reciprocity, redistribution, and market exchange. Reciprocity is obligatory gift and counter-gift giving between persons who stand in some socially defined relationship to one another. Indigenously, gifts of produced items and factors are regarded simply as one form, material or economic, of expressing social relationships. In our own society, a birthday gift from father to son is just one among many ways of expressing their kinship relationship. Reciprocity plays a much more important part in primitive African societies than in our own. The frequency and amount of such gifts are greater. The number of different people with whom one person may engage in gift exchange is larger. The social obligations and transactions to do so are stronger. And above all, such gift reciprocity may play an important part in production, especially in labor allocation, which is rarely the case in our own economy outside the family farm. It's funny, they did make the comparison of the African farmer to a farmer in the Midwest in America, right? And they're kind of making it again. After describing the network of obligatory gift transfers of labor and material products among kin and friends at ordinary times, as well as during festive occasions, Chapera and Goodwin explain the importance of reciprocal flows in Bantu societies. The main incentive to conformity with these obligations is reciprocity. In the relative absence of industrial specialization and consequent economic interdependence, kinship serves to establish greater social cohesion within the community and to integrate its activities into a wider cooperation than obtains within the restricted limits of the household. The so-called, quote-unquote, communal system of the Bantu is largely a manifestation of this close bond of solidarity and reciprocity arising out of kinship and affecting well nigh every aspect of daily life. I mean, you'll hear us on KWAZ radio talk about practice reciprocity all the time. I'm sure you've heard me say it, you've heard the pro-Black perspective say it, the learning curve with the revolutionary matron as well. The great variety of items and services transacted reciprocally helps to explain why production is invisible, so to speak, in primitive economies. From the viewpoint of the participants, the movement of resources and products is not regarded as an activity distinct from other social activities. A gift of labor to help a kinsman clear his land part of production, may not be distinguished from a gift of cattle to help him acquire a bride, or indeed a gift of a song or a name. The pivotal matter is the social relationship between the persons, which induces gifts of labor, cattle, songs, and names. Okay. That. When the source of the gift obligation is the same, there is no reason for the participants to mark off the labor gift as part of production. Right? This is why it's almost invisible, as he said earlier in this paragraph. Right? There's no reason for the participants to mark off the labor gift as part of production. It is only when production activities become divorced from activities expressing social obligation that production becomes marked off as a peculiarly economic activity apart from other activities, as of course occurs in market economy. One of the reasons why Black folks in America are the way they are, is because of this thing that that the pro-Black perspective just said in the chat a few minutes back. Economics is the basis of culture. If they control your economics, they're going to stop you from being any type of Black nationalist, having any type of Black nationalist or Pan-African type of culture. And we're just not getting it. The learning curve says, Lagrange, how farmers and the Klan organized some white farmers in Michigan. Okay, so that's how the Klan does it too. You see how, you know what I want to say there, right? This brings us to redistribution. Redistribution entails obligatory payments of material items, money, objects, or labor services to some socially recognized center, usually king, chief, or priest, who reallocates portions of what he receives to provide community services, such as defense or feasts, and to reward specific persons. Right? So notice who they said does the redistribution here. King, chief, or priest. Right? Typically, but not invariably, central figure is also endowed with the right to distribute unused land or hunting sites. These allocation rights are vested in him in the name of the community by virtue of his high political, judicial, military, or religious authority. As with reciprocity between friends or kin, the obligation to give over factors such as labor for the chief's garden or new house may not be distinguished from the obligation to pay over items such as food. Indeed, what appear to us as economic transactions of resources and products need not be distinguished indigenously from such as express the obligation to perform military service. Among the Bantu, the chief receives payments of specific goods and services from all his people, payments of fines and blood wealth. Such tribute payments are partly in recognition of his position as a steward of tribal landholdings and of his judicial authority. The word tribute is important here in both its economic and social meanings. The goods and labor paid over are tribute. The social recognition of authority is a tribute. By virtue of his official status as head of the tribe, he has also played an important part in the economic organization. He receives tribute from his people, both in kind and in labor. He was given a portion of every animal slaughtered or killed in the chase. The lobola, bride wealth, for his chief wife was paid by the members of his tribe. He had the right to call upon his subjects to perform certain tasks for him, such as building his huts or clearing the land for his wives' gardens, Above all, he received fees for hearing cases and fines for misdemeanors, and in cases of homicide, the culprit paid compensation not to the relatives of the deceased, but to him. Boy, don't let some of these black folks in America catch on to that shit, because they'll be the chief of Tennessee and demanding tribute from blacks in Tennessee. You know what I mean? Let's not let them get that on, right? His material receipts cannot be regarded apart from the chief's material obligations to his people. He uses the payments and fines for his own maintenance, but also to provide the community services and to reward special service of his subjects. Right? So that's for the grifters who might come along in the future and think this is a good idea for a grift. He uses the payments and fines for his own maintenance, sure, but also to provide community services and to reward special service of his subjects. All of this accumulation of wealth by the chief was really made on behalf of the tribe. One quality which was always required of the chief was that he should be generous. He had to provide for the members of his tribe in times of necessity. If a man's crops failed, he would look to the chief for assistance. The chief gave out his cattle to the poorer members of his tribe to herd for him and allowed them to use the milk. He rewarded the service of his warriors by gifts of cattle. His subjects frequently visited him in his kraal, and during their stay, he fed and entertained them. Just as an individual received land from his chief and labor from his wives, kin, and friends as a matter of right, so too does he receive material aid in time of need as a matter of social right. Rarely in African societies are there special institutions to care for the disabled or the destitute. Subsistence is guaranteed among the Bantu, as it is the case widely in primitive Africa, in two ways: through socially structured rights to receive factors of production, and through emergency allotments of food from the chief and gifts from kin. It is these socially assured rights to labor and land, and to emergency subsistence, which have sometimes been mistaken for primitive communism, which I've heard people talking about before. Let me just pause here for a quick station break. I'll be back on the other side.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
This is D Webb with the Harsh Reality Podcast, asking you to tune in where we tackle the news of the day that affects our community, only on KWAZ Radio.
Peace, family. This is Oni, inviting you to listen to the pro-black perspective, where black problems are addressed with black solutions.
Greetings, fam. Tune in to The Learning Curve with me, the revolutionary matron on KWAZ Radio.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
Hey, if you're a regular listener of this show, make sure you're also a listener of the other shows on KWAZ Radio. Also, make sure that you share the show. Talk about it with other people, even if you don't share the link. Let people know, hey, there's this show called The Learning Curve that I like. Or there's this show called The Pro-Black Perspective that I think is fire and you should tune into on Sunday mornings or what have you. You know, but definitely, you know, share the word. Just when you're having these discussions on Black empowerment and Pan-Africanism, also throw in things that you heard from KWAZ Radio. In the chat, Mr. Untouchable says, not into redistribution, LOL. It's been tried. Someone usually gets shared out. Someone gets more than others, usually the chief. Well, yeah, if you listen to this, you know, the chief makes out like a bandit, like we say. But it seems that through the culture and the education, it would seem that they're learned or taught to be generous and not just to hoard all that they, all that they receive. The learning curve says we need to take another look at these crooked ass do-nothing preachers. Absolutely. All right. Mr. Untouchable said this is why the queen and her family still eats off of the public hundreds of years later. Tribute. That's true. That's true. It will be different, and I'm sure it was somewhat different, much different, when it was Africans under African chiefs, right? The learning curve says tributes are the price of admission in the entertainment industry. Yep. The learning curve. Shaking my head. Tributes. So we're at this session called Market Exchange. As with reciprocity and redistribution, market exchange is a common transactional procedure, especially in West Africa. However, indigenous market transactions differ sharply from those labeled reciprocity and redistribution, and differ also in important respects from market transactions in developed countries. Purchase and sale seem to us peculiarly economic, permeated by utility and material gain, precisely because market transactions are neither induced by nor express social obligations or relationships. Unlike the partners to reciprocal and redistributive transactions, buyers and sellers in the market share no social tie, which obliges them to engage in the market transactions. Therefore, terms of trade may be haggled out without social disruption, both parties to the exchange being socially free to seek their own maximum material advantage. Now, you see that right there is how they get Africans to switch up, right? The individual advantage. Rugged individualism, like the matron talks about. Indigenous market exchange in Africa might better be called marketplace exchange to point up the absence of labor and land markets. Primitive Africa, market exchange is usually confined to a limited range of produced items transacted by face-to-face buyers and sellers in marketplaces. Moreover, the market exchanges are usually peripheral in the sense that most sellers do not acquire the bulk of their livelihood and buyers the bulk of their daily use goods and services via the marketplace sales and purchases. Although the market prices are determined by familiar supply and demand forces, there is absent that crucial feedback effect which links change in market price to production decisions. Unlike the price mechanism in a market integrated economy like the United States, prices formed in African marketplaces do not serve to reallocate factors among production lines because labor and land do not enter the market and basic livelihood is acquired in non-market spheres. Marketplace exchange is found widely in Africa as a peripheral pattern in the same societies in which all important output and factor flows are carried on via reciprocity and redistribution. So, Mr. Untouchable earlier said that he's not a fan of redistribution because oftentimes folks are shared out or folks are shared more, like the chief. Now, the question, and it's one that we can't really answer, I guess, but it does come to mind for me, is would we see it that way if we didn't have Western indoctrination, if we weren't seeing things through Western lenses? In other words, did ancient Africans, were there Africans who, from these more primitive economies in the past, who were sitting there and saying, look, I got shared out? And yeah, it was the chief who did it, who did it. Like, was that the case? Because from what I'm understanding, they had the safety net. The social organization allows the safety net to kind of cover you, right? Through being family and whatnot. So is the outlook that Mr. Untouchable has, which I see exactly where he's coming from, but do we see that way because we're looking at it from the lenses of the West? It is necessary, this section is called Colonial Impact in the New National Economies. It is necessary to consider the socio-economic impact of colonialism to understand the present situation in much of Africa. 2 points especially must be made clear. The destructive aspect of colonialism was not economic exploitation of Africans in the conventional Marxist sense. It could hardly be so, considering that material poverty was already the common lot before the Europeans arrived. Interesting. It is perhaps our own cultural emphasis which makes us focus on the real income component of welfare and regard it as the sole component. Sorry, I'm messing up. Typically, colonialism did not make Africans worse off materially. It destroyed culture and society of which the indigenous economy was an inextricable part. Let me read that again. I find that interesting. Typically, colonialism did not make Africans worse off materially. Destroyed culture and society of which the indigenous economy was an inextricable part. It destroyed materially poor but unusually integrated ways of life, wherein economic and social processes were mutually dependent and reinforcing. So you see something with white folks? Like, I gotta give them, I'm gonna use the code that Erzulism uses a lot. I want to use the code that Erzulism uses a lot. The barrel maker is really interesting, man. The barrel maker will recognize that damage was done. He would recognize that damage is done while talking as if he did the most creation, so to speak. Right? So let me read this, let me read what I highlighted one more time. Typically, colonialism did not make Africans worse off materially. Destroyed culture and society of which the indigenous economy was an inextricable part. It destroyed materially poor but unusually integrated ways of life. Look at a backhanded kind of compliment there, wherein economic and social processes were mutually dependent and reinforcing. This little blurb that I highlighted here, for those who could see it, is really the thesis of this whole damn paper. And the whole situation we got ourselves into. This is something on a different plane from simple material betterment or worsening. The destructive colonial impact consisted in forcing socio-economic change, which was not meaningful to Africans in terms of their traditional societies. For the sting of change lies not in change itself, but in change which is devoid of social meaning. Despite any real income increases, which may have resulted, European enterprise was devoid of social meaning for Africans, because it required work which was not part of social obligation to kin, friends, or rulers. Work for Europeans was not done as a byproduct of traditional social relationships, and work for Europeans meant not working at those traditional tasks which were expressive of social rights and obligations of indigenous labor itself, we can say that it is a socially integrative activity. Nor must we forget that wherever European and other more complex societies have encouraged primitive man, the carrot has been a bribe and a pitiful indemnity for those who must willingly neglect the performance of what are to them socially important functions so that they can perform during that time activities which are not integrative in their own society. I mean, y'all hear it, right? I mean, Zuliism is here. Y'all say what's up to Zuliism. By the way, if you're here listening in the background, hit the like button. You know, do me the favor, hit that like button. If you haven't subscribed, subscribe to the channel and subscribe to KWAZ Radio's YouTube channel as well. Zuliism is here and he says, economic hitman, cultural hitman. Crazy. Wow. Mr. Untouchable says, Koku, you going quickly over those footnotes, bro. We must come back to them one day. So I realized that the first set of footnotes I jumped over. This is why I didn't continue. This is why I didn't read any, because I already skipped it. But like I said, there was another paper I was considering reading tonight. And that paper was referenced in this paper. That paper was called The Impact of Money on an African Subsistence Economy. And what I'm going to do, Mr. Untouchable, because that paper too has a bunch of footnotes. I don't know. I don't think they're as expansive as the ones here. But what I'll do, I will, when I read that paper, I'll come back to these footnotes in that episode, right? Because they're kind of related papers. Material income is important to Africans, not only because it sustains life, but also, in Steiner's phrase, because the work processes which yield income and the transactional disposition of the labor resources and products are so organized as to express and strengthen social relationships and purpose, kinship, tribal affiliation, friendship, and religious duty. It is noteworthy that in the few cases in which Africans have been able to work for Europeans without giving up most of their usual activities, traditional social life has remained intact. Most frequently, however, entering the newly created market economy as laborer, specialist producer of cash crops, or commercial trader buying for resale has meant enlarged material income at the sacrifice of work activities which were necessary to traditional social organization, and so the latter deteriorated. What has been, and by the way, if you guys see a footnote that sticks out, put it in the chat, and I'll go back and read it. What has been called the demonstration effect increased willingness to enter commercial activities in order to acquire Western material items, works in the same direction. In traditional society, material wealth acquisition was largely a byproduct of social status. Typically, only those of higher social rank were permitted to acquire certain wealth items or an unusual amount of wealth. In the kingdom of Dahomey, for example, the acculturation of wealth, except by those whose status entitled them to wealth, was deemed treason to the state. Sorry, did I say acculturation? Sorry. The accumulation of wealth, except by those whose status entitled them to wealth, was deemed treason to the state. A socially divisive impact of Western economy in Africa has been the democratization of wealth. Neither market organization nor industrialism impose status criteria on wealth acquisition. Rather, the opposite is the case. So, you hear a matron talk about this money consciousness type stuff, right? And now we have a little understanding of how that money consciousness is really promoted under the system, right? It should be added that the force of socioeconomic change in Africa cannot be explained in the simple terms of changed ownership of property. To the extent that Africans sell their labor to European firms and other Africans, they become proletarians. What strikes the Marxists is that the wage laborers engage in production processes, the capital instruments of which they do not own. This is true, of course. This is true, of course, but the crucial point is not that the workers do not own the buildings and machines, but that they come to depend for their livelihood on the impersonal market sale of their labor. Whew. Oh boy. Material income thereby depends upon forces, people, and institutions outside of and are controlled by the indigenous social community. When I read something like that, right, which basically says for you to have something, to share with your family or your friends or whatever, your people, your community, right? You have to go entirely into this alien world. Give up, I would say, one of our most precious resources as people is who and how we use our, who and how and who with we use our labor, right? And you have to go outside there and deal with this savage just to do that. And then we wonder why, the most fundamental unit in African society, the family, is just destroyed. We wonder why we can't get along with our women or our women can't get along with our men. We wonder why. We're not doing anything that resembles, or like I, the term I like to use, that resonates with who we are fundamentally. When I hear black folks talking about they're on the paper chase, they're trying to get the bag, you are completely inside this Eurocentric portal. And you're duking it out. You're doing something that's not even who you are. It's not even who you are. Work becomes a thing apart from the other aspects of life, organized as a separate association and not merely one facet of community life. That's just like, remember when at some point during the pandemic, they brought out this black lady, I think she's a virologist, Kismikia, Dr. Kismikia or whatever she is, her name is. And who brought her out? How do we know her? Because these folks brought her out. These folks put her in front of us, right? They probably looked at her name and said, Kismikia, oh, that's going to resonate well with those Negroes. Imagine a world where the work that you do, we have Dorico Cooper Photography in the chat right now. We have Azuliism, who is a filmmaker. Imagine you could do that work, right? You could do that work and it's in your community. You don't have to leave your community to do your work. It's in your community. It's with your people. It's for your people. and you could just live your life just doing this work and being able to afford the things that you need for you and your family. And that's what we're just not checking on that stuff. Reciprocal Photography said, peace to Azuliism. He said, Confessions of an Economic Hitman, which you guys, if you haven't already, subscribe to the Pro-Black Perspectives channel. He has an episode where he breaks down a video from that guy who's the economic hitman. You know? I think Mr. Untouchable is in accounting or something like that. Imagine you doing that for the people in your community, right? In your community and for the benefit of the people in your community. You know what I mean? I continue. What is important for our purpose is that the same is true where Africans do not become proletarians but enter market economy by producing cash crops on their own land. Here they own the instruments of production, but like the wage laborers, also come to depend for their livelihood on market sale for a money income. The latter mode of entering the exchange economy can be as disruptive to indigenous social and economic organization as wage labor for the same reasons. So that's saying that even if you become, let's say you're an entrepreneur and you decide to grow a cash crop, right? You basically have the same issues at the end. Even though you might own that land for which you're creating this, you have the same problem, right? As far as the way you used to do things before this system came into your culture, right? But you have the same problem. To continue, it is not alienation from the means of production which is socially divisive, but rather the dependence upon impersonal market forces unrelated to indigenous social control, the separating of economy from society by divorcing resource allocation, work management, product disposition from expressions of social obligation. And to be sure, the consequent loss of socially guaranteed subsistence as well. I'm thirsty. In advocating policy measures for developing African economies, one must avoid the vice of utopianism, to create a blueprint of what ought to be, which bears no relation to what is, and so is unachievable. I have to agree with that. However, to retain indigenous social organization in the new economies of markets and machines is obviously impossible. My question to you guys listening is it? Right? He says, however, to retain indigenous social organization in the new economies of markets. Oh, well, yeah. If they come into your culture, yeah, it's hard to it's hard to avoid it. Yeah. What is not impossible is to frame local economic organization and national policies which allow the expression of traditional values of reciprocity and redistribution within the new economic and technological context. Okay, so I completely understand what he's saying in these last two sentences. That's really what I was kind of getting to with my question. Can Africans still kind of go back to traditional economies, locally, but still have national policies that allow them to interact with these other economies, right? As we are learning from our own welfare state experience, Even within efficiency constraints, economic organization is capable of contrived flexibility to accommodate social values. The extent of diversity among the already developed nations indicates the possibility of creating distinctive African forms viable economically and socially. The real task is not to force change, but to induce it in a manner which will be meaningful to the members of the societies it affects. The institutions being fashioned in the newly independent countries of Africa may appear somewhat suspect in the West. They include strong central controls, unions, producers and consumers, cooperatives, and much else of the paraphernalia of welfare and socialist states, even at the very beginnings of development. Indeed, even in countries without industrialization. What deserves emphasis is that political and economic structures transplanted to Africa from the West are being adopted with major changes to suit African needs and traditions. Neither democracy nor the welfare state mean to Africans what they do to Westerners, because Africans did not share those Western political and economic experiences in reaction to which democracy and the welfare state came into being in the West. To us, the welfare state is a reaction against the social and economic experience of squalor, oppression, and war resulting from industrialism within the economic context of the relatively uncontrolled market system. The Africans neither shared our experiences of the pre-1930 system, nor committed themselves to our laissez-faire ideology, which we so painfully had to unlearn. Yeah, there is some good information in some of those footnotes, so I'll have to do something next time, or when I revisit this work through the other paper. I'll have to touch on some of that. We should not be overly eager to create in Africa an uncontrolled market idyllic, the blessings of which we so insistently deny ourselves. To Africans, the welfare state policies of strong central control mean techniques for rapid economic development and political unification, which, at the same time, express social responsibility in accord with traditional usages. It would be unseemly to deny the Africans material aid or sympathy because, like us, they insist upon having institutions shaped by historical experience and current needs. And that's the end of the paper, right? There's a footnote here. Africa has two kinds of history: the conventional kind to be studied through European accounts of exploration, settlement, and colonial rule, and an unconventional kind to be studied through anthropological accounts of indigenous economic and social organization. That was the paper. I hope that for anyone who listens to this episode, I hope that it inspires some thinking as to what we can do, change our system. But it clearly, and I think the Pro-Black Perspective did a good job of this, an awesome job of this some time ago. But it really just hammers in this point of, once you're dealing with someone else's economic system, it's going to disrupt anything you call culture, social organization, relationships, etc. It's going to control that. It's going to control that. So the question is now, right? We have more information about how the communalism really worked, and we've seen this before in other papers. Thank you to the Pro-Black Perspective. He says good reading. I appreciate that. I appreciate that. Azuliism was asked by Mr. Untouchable, are you a filmmaker, really? Azuliism should answer the question, but I would say, yeah, he's a filmmaker. I interviewed Azuliism for his directorial debut of a film called The Raging Elephant, right? So, Mr. Untouchable, you could go back in the archives and check that out. In fact, if I remember it, I'll link it at the end of this video tonight, right? But we know now, I mean, we kind of knew before, but we really know what resonates with us best and what was disrupted. And we can see in our lives now, in this paper, we can see in our lives today why we have the problems that we have interpersonally, as far as male, female relationships, as far as family dynamics, right? We're operating on a system that doesn't serve us. Impersonal. Doesn't promote community, right? And the matron has been telling me, like, a lot of black folks on the West Coast apparently have chosen that quote unquote rugged individualism. You know, shit that doesn't resonate with us, it doesn't do anything for us. And so I hope now when we have conversations, I hope we can really start talking about doing things in a way that we used to do things. We're going to have to tackle how we're going to feed ourselves. And I think that's the first thing we got to start understanding, right? The primary source of how we will feed ourselves, right? And then how we can work everything around being able to provide the basic needs for ourselves and our families, right? And figuring out the mechanism of how to share the work so that everyone can be held down together, everyone can be good, while we still do our individual things with our family groups and all that. You know, that's the thing that we have to really figure out. And so I hope that the paper helped folks in thinking about that. You guys, while you're here, still with me live, type in your thoughts about the paper. I'll read them live. What I can do in the meantime, let me play this call to action. If you or someone you know thinks you'd be or they'd be a good addition to KWAZ Radio, you guys should listen to this.
Have you ever considered joining KWAZ Radio? Each of our hosts shares their unique perspective with you. You might have a perspective that needs to be shared. If that's true, hit us up at kwaz.radio@gmail.com. What are you gonna do? What you gonna do?
Also, as we are entering, I guess, the holiday seasons, there's merch for the whole KWAZ Radio family. You guys can check out the KWAZ merch as well. Greetings, everyone. This is Koku from the Bitter Medicine Podcast. I just want to jump on real quick and highlight a tweet made by the revolutionary matron of the Learning Curve podcast on KWAZ Radio. She says in this tweet, buy black and support KWAZ Radio hosts. Buy a t-shirt today. You can go to t-shirtepiphanies.com/KWAZ-radio-merch. You can support all the hosts like Onitase from the Pro-Black Perspective, myself, Koku from the Bitter Medicine Podcast, the Harsh Reality Podcast with D Webb and Al Miguel, and last but not least, the revolutionary matron from the Learning Curve podcast. And I just wanted to show you also, you can look at and see some of the first shirts that we have here. We have a lot of size options for you guys to choose from. So make sure to go ahead and support each of these shows by purchasing a t-shirt today. The reality is that when you buy merchandise, support of one of your favorite shows on the network, you help to make that show even better, right? And by purchasing and wearing these t-shirts, you are showing people around you that you are included in the culture that we are creating at KWAZ Radio. All right? Buy it because you love what we're doing. Buy a t-shirt because you want to be a part of this thing that we're creating, right? And buy it because you want to show people that you feel united with the subject and the cause of the shows on KWAZ Radio. I'm Koku from the Bitter Medicine Podcast. You guys be good. Peace. Yes, indeed. In the chat, there's some comments. Zuliism says, send me an email on the Discord. He's talking to Mr. Untouchable. My name is Aidi Toma on there. So Mr. Untouchable, you could definitely link up with Zuliism to get the link. And to check out his film. Rico Cooper Photography said this was a great paper, definitely food for thought. Yeah, I hope the food for thought is that we got to get back to really that fundamental concept of reciprocity and even redistribution. You know, we got to make sure that everyone has their fair share, you know, amongst ourselves, and we got to figure out how to make that happen. Mr. Untouchable said this document is a good document and nation building. I'm glad you appreciated it, the reading and the document itself. And by the way, if you guys ever want document, you could email me or hit me up on the Discord, like Zuliism said earlier. Email me or hit me up on the Discord. I'll gladly give you the paper as well. I want folks to really work on changing these conditions. So one day we all meet up, all after having tried our different various ways of changing our condition. We all meet up and form Voltron, so to speak, and really knock this out the park. Dorico Cooper says, I am so thankful for all of you. I appreciate you too, Dorico, as I'm sure others in the chat do as well. He says, thank you for reading this paper, Koku. No problem. All right, with that said, another Thursday night finished. I'll be back on Saturday for Shoot the Breeze. I saw some people post some topics on the Discord for Shoot the Breeze. You know, let's try post a few more, and we'll tackle that Saturday night. I should also have my setup situated where I could have more people on the panel at one time as well. Thanks to those who donated to the show recently. I know Dorico Cooper did recently. Ochanda did recently as well. You can Cash App me if you want to help support the show, help better the program. You want to support the other shows, you know that there's a merch store. Go and support that. Until Saturday, you guys be good. Peace.
Thanks for listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast with your host, Koku. If you like what you just heard, we hope you pass along our web address, bittermedicineblogs.com, to your friends and colleagues, and share our show to all your social media. Be sure to check out our archive section on our website for previous podcasts. This has been a KWAZ radio production. Join us next time for another session of the Bitter Medicine Podcast. Follow us on Facebook at Bitter Medicine Show, Twitter, Bitter Meds, Tumblr, Bitter Meds, Instagram, Bitter Medicine.